Eris, trans-Neptunian object and dwarf planet in astronomy, goddess of strife in Greek mythology, and not fully understood yet in astrology. Being a newly discovered planet, astrologers have had only 15 years to use this planet in the chart. After studying Eris and coming to my own humble understanding of the archetype, my hope for this video is to share my interest in her and how important I think Eris is in astrology. If you are an astrologer that does already use Eris, let me know in the comments. In astrology, we gain insight into a planet's archetype by looking at the mythology of the god or deity a planet is named after. We also gain insight by looking at the astronomy and physical characteristics of a planet. The distance from the sun and how long it takes to move through the zodiac being an important one. I will cover the mythology and astronomy of Eris and talk about how they help show the astrological archetype and sum up the astrology of Eris at the end. Greek goddess Eris, Roman name Discordia, goddess and personified spirit of strife, discord, contention, hate, and rivalry. The goddess who calls forth war and discord, giver of pain, nurse of tearful wars, infernal monster, whose viperine hair is caught up in a headband soaked in blood. She was often portrayed as the daemona of the strife of war, haunting the battlefield and delighting in human bloodshed, increasing the moaning of men. Friend and sister of Mars, she is insatiable in her desire for bloodshed. After all the other gods have withdrawn from the battlefield, she still remains rejoicing over the havoc that has been made. In astrology, this means that after all the other gods or planets or psychological parts withdraw from the psyche, she remains, the power that she has on an individual when she takes over. Eris was the mother of evil spirits which plagued humanity. These allegorical beings are the cause or representations of man's misfortune, which means they are really in our psyche, and even the ancient Greeks and Romans understood this. The gods weren't literal. Strife gave birth to toil and forgetfulness and famine and tearful sorrows, and fighting, battles, murders, manslaughters, quarrels, lying words, disputes, lawlessness, and ruin, all of one nature, and oath, who most troubles men upon earth when anyone willingly swears a false oath. Oath is also the trans-Neptunian object Orcus, and I will elaborate more on him in another video. The YouTuber Coaxel made a great little video animation telling the story of Eris and the Golden Apple, and I will leave you with the clip now. You can watch the full thing on his channel.
So Zeus decided to throw a big crazy wedding for Peleus, the king of Aegina, and Thetis, who was a sea nymph. They were getting married and Zeus wanted to throw a big party for them. So all the gods and goddesses were invited to the wedding except for Eris because, well, she was kind of the goddess of discord, which automatically made her a party pooper. This made Eris very, very, very angry. Dun dun dun. So Eris just decided to sneak in. She brought with her a golden apple. Ooh. The golden apple was inscribed with the word Callistic, which meant for the prettiest one. Ooh! In pure party poopian fashion, Eris decided to throw the apple in the middle of the wedding. This obviously started a huge fight among all the goddesses. This fight went on until there was only 3 goddesses left. Hera, goddess of women and marriage, who was also Zeus's wife, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. When they were tired of fighting, they approached Zeus and demanded he make the decision on who was the prettiest. Zeus was like, ha 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 ha, no. This was smart of him because, well, when 3 goddesses approach you and ask who is the prettiest, there is no right answer. Instead, Zeus commanded Hermes to take the golden apple and the 3 goddesses down to Earth where Paris of Troy lived and had him make the decision.
As we can see, Eris was the cause of a great war in Greek history, the Trojan War, which caused great suffering and death. Her one act of disruption led to an entire war. Hesiod writes in his Works and Days of Eris, "It was never true that there was only one Eris. There have always been 2 on earth. There is one you could like when you understand her. The other is hateful. The 2 Enrates have separate natures. There is one Eris who builds up evil war and slaughter. She is harsh. No man loves her. But under compulsion and by the will of the immortals, men promote this rough Eris. But the other one was born the elder daughter of Nyx, or Night in Greek mythology. The son of Kronos, who sits on high and dwells in the bright air, set her in the roots of the earth and among men. She is far kinder. She pushes the shiftless man to work for all his laziness. A fable that gives insight into Eris and how to handle her nature is the fable of Eris and Hercules, or Heracles. Heracles was making his way through a narrow pass. He saw something that looked like an apple lying on the ground, and he tried to smash it with his club. After having been struck by the club, the thing swelled up to twice its size. Heracles struck it again with his club, even harder than before, and the thing then expanded to such a size that it blocked Heracles' way. Heracles let go of his club and stood there, amazed. Athena saw him and said, "Oh, Heracles, don't be so surprised. This thing that has brought about your confusion is aporia, contentiousness, and eris, strife. If you just leave it alone, it stays small. But if you decide to fight it, then it swells from its small size and grows large." That is a fundamental lesson when it comes to Eris and the astrological archetype. Eris was discovered on January 5th, 2005, by Mike Brown and his team. The astronomer is responsible for many trans-Neptunian object discoveries. Her discovery sparked controversy in the astronomy community and the world at large, causing the demotion of Pluto to dwarf planet status and the invention of said category. And true to her archetype, during her discovery, she caused discord and disruption to the status quo in astronomy about how planets and other minor planets and asteroids are classified. The classifications made by astronomers about the planets gives further insight into the archetype of the planet for astrology. More detailed understanding and classification of the planets means a more detailed understanding of our psyche in astrology. Pluto was always considered a planet since its discovery in 1930, but once Eris was found, it matched Pluto in almost every way, size, shape, and so a new class of planet was made, dwarf planets. In astrology, the dwarf planets are on par with the regular planets in terms of their significance and effects. Ceres, Pluto, and of course Eris. There is a multitude of asteroids, but the dwarf planets have shown to consistently have more powerful effects. Eris is as powerful as Pluto, and we all know how much Pluto affects us in astrology. The dwarf planets are separate from the other planets, mainly because they have not cleared their orbit of other objects. In this case, Ceres has not cleared out the other asteroids in the main belt, and Pluto has not cleared out the Kuiper belt. But dwarf planets have some characteristics that are the same as planets. Eris has one known moon, Dysnomia. This was Eris's daughter in Greek mythology, and it means lawlessness or anarchy. Astrologically, the planet always carries with her lawlessness or anarchy as a major part of her archetype. Eris has a highly eccentric orbit, giving it a perihelion of 38.3 astronomical units and an aphelion of 97.5, a semi-major axis of 67.8 AU. It has an orbital period of 557 years. Eris has an inclination of 44 degrees off of the ecliptic, which is a lot for a planet, as you can see here compared to the other planets. Orbital eccentricity is how stretched out the orbit is from the circle, and inclination is how far off from the ecliptic a planet is, the tilt. Keywords in astrology for Eris include strife, discord, contention, rivalry, disagreements, cruelty, rage, hate, harshness, evil wars, slaughter, bloodshed, gloating, delight in havoc, lunacy, delight in bloodshed, relentless, wrath, the battlefield, shameless hatred, sorrow, the infernal monster, strong, defender of peoples, giver of pain, nurse of tearful wars, the last to close an argument. She creates strife, envy, motivation through rivalry or discord, and through her children she also represents toil, forgetfulness, starvation, pains, fighting, battles, murders, manslaughters, quarrels, lies, disputes, lawlessness, ruin, and in the positive, oaths, who does more damage than any other to earthly men, when anyone of his knowledge swears a false oath. The archetypes surrounding Eris can present themselves in many ways, from someone who is disagreeable and confrontational to someone who is sadistic and cruel and takes joy in others' pain. The lesson is to transform those desires and feelings into a healthy competition. If prominent in the birth chart or an aspect to other planets, Eris acts as a disruptive force. As astrologer Nick Anthony Fiorenze puts it, Eris can create disruptive commotion, upsetting our existing, limiting, and antiquated structures of consciousness. The discord and disruption Eris creates often results in a positive outcome in the longer term. End quote. Because Eris is slow-moving in the chart, it represents longer-term and slow-moving changes. In the natal chart, if one has Eris prominent, They can embody the Eris discord and ability to cause disruption and change, for better or worse. Eris prominent people will be the last to finish an argument, and this can both be good or incredibly annoying. One aspect of Eris in the culture right now is the prominence of trolling, especially online. This took off when Uranus moved to conjunct Eris, but the underlying energy behind trolling is the Eris archetype. Internet trolls are disruptive and detached and relentless in their desire to spill metaphorical blood, i.e., upsetting people. They aren't all bad, though, and memes and challenging ideas in the status quo help to challenge the status quo and change antiquated structures of consciousness. Disrupting events can catalyze significant shifts in our lives that we wouldn't otherwise do. A person with strong Eris in their chart might become someone who does this to others. A person who revels in fighting, physical or otherwise, who takes joy in it, is strong Eris. Mars is about fighting too, but Mars knows when to call it quits for the day. Mars is about aggression, but Mars wants to win. Eris just wants to cause disruption. Eris will keep fighting until there's nothing left. Mercury is also tied to trolling and the concept of the emperor wears no clothes, but Mercury's trolling is more superficial and intellectual, shown by its faster moving speed. Eris strikes a nerve and can take pleasure in doing so. That nerve she strikes is related to one's ego and the ideas we hold on to. Eris cuts it down and can help us grow through metaphorical bloodshed, pain, and more. If one were to put the three archetypes of fighting and war in order, it goes Pallas, defensive warfare strategy, Mars, active or aggressive warfare, the typical physical adrenaline-fueled side of war, machismo, proving oneself, soldiers, and most brutal is Eris, who is evil wars, harshness, strife, bloodshed, havoc, and ruin. Pallas motivates through just wars, Mars motivates through aggressive wars, and Eris motivates through evil wars or unjust wars. These are also three types of aggressive or fighting reactions in people, and they represent the three types. These three bodies, Pallas, Mars, and Eris, will all be in aspect to each other coming this August. Mars will square Pallas in Capricorn, while joining Eris in Aries. Regarding war, Eris rules the type to fund both sides of a war, to create chaos. We must not underestimate Eris and the power of this planet that it has in our psyche, the evil it can motivate people to do with a smile on their face. The other side of Eris is that she protects mankind. She is a fighter for men, for the people. She protects men against the gods, people of power, people who think they are gods in society nowadays. In the positive, Eris instills rivalry to motivate people to do better and to be better. Similar to the positives of Mars, she instills a relentless drive in the psyche. So what matters is what we do with that drive. Similar to the energy of Mars, it can turn to aggression or it can be used for good. Eris pushes the shiftless man to work for all his laziness. A man looks at his neighbor who is rich, then he too wants to work. For the rich man presses on with his plowing and planning and ordering of his estate. So the neighbor envies the neighbor who presses on towards wealth. Such Eris, strife, is a good friend to mortals. It might not be pretty, but Eris isn't pretty, and she doesn't care. I mentioned previously, and I want to mention again, Eris's moon is named after her daughter Dysnomia, which means lawlessness or anarchy. Due to this, and what was said about her expressing through her children, she also rules anarchy in astrology. With Pluto currently square to Eris, and it has been for a few years now, we are seeing class struggles, power plays, argumentation, and fighting in many ways. Issues around brutality have come up, police brutality and otherwise, abuse, sexual abuse, and cruelty. Online and otherwise, many people don't care about the other side. They just want to argue, to fight, to cause strife and pain. Not even to win. Mars wants to win. Eris just wants suffering and bloodshed, metaphorical or otherwise. Like Eris, the last of the gods at the battlefield, reveling in the bloodshed, people have taken on the Eris-Pluto square this way. A far more in-depth look into Eris's transits can be done, but here is a brief rundown of the Pluto-Eris cycle, just the conjunction squares and opposition. Starting in and around 1756, Pluto and Eris were conjunct in the time of the French and Indian War, as well as the 7 Years' War, leading up to the American Revolution. They formed their first quarter square in and around 1907. Around this time, many things were happening, but the FBI was formed, the Mann Act was passed, which was an act about sexual abuse of women and children and the trading of them across state borders. In 1906, there was the Atlanta Riots. In 1906, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair was also published, as well as the Pure Food and Drug Act. In 1906 to 07, Typhoid Mary. In 1907, the Panic of '07, the Bank Panic of '07, as well as the Aldrich-Vreeland Act of 1908, leading to the Federal Reserve Act, as well as the Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act, and, like I mentioned previously, the Mann Act. Moving ahead in time, we move to the Pluto-Eris opposition in and around 1976. Going back to 1973 was the start of the oil crisis of the 70s, which lasted pretty much the rest of the decade. We had the Watergate scandal, later Nixon resigning, Roe v. Wade, the Paris Peace Accord. There was the super tornado outbreak of '74. Microsoft was founded in 1975, and a year later, Apple Computers was founded. Beginning in 1974 was the desegregation of Boston schools. In '75 was the Helsinki Accord. In 1975, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was built and finished in 1977. In '75 was the fall of Saigon. In 1976, the Copyright Act of 1976 happened, giving rise to our modern copyright laws today. The first personal home computer, the Commodore PET, as well as the Atari 2600, the first personal home video game system, came out in '77. We saw the movie Jaws come out, as well as the Humboldt Park riots. And finally, moving ahead to the current final quarter square between Pluto and Eris, starting roughly in 2012, and depending on the orb you use, the Pluto-Eris square will start to move apart roughly around 2024, 2025. All of these events that I just mentioned, in my mind, relate to the archetypes of Eris and Pluto and relate to current times now. Going back to just before the American Revolution, there will be an exact Pluto-Eris square on June 14th, 2020, depending on when you're watching this video. But Eris and Pluto are exactly square all of 2020. Eris has been in the sign of Aries since 1923 and fully moved into Aries by 1927 and will stay there until 2043. Unless you were born before then, you have Eris in Aries. At what degree? Here's a quick rundown of the decades. If you're born in the 1940s, it moved from 3 degrees Aries to 6 degrees Aries. The 50s, 6 degrees to 8 degrees. The 60s, 8 degrees to 11 degrees. The 70s, 11 to 13. The 80s, 13 degrees to 16 degrees. The 90s, 16 degrees to 18 degrees. The 2000s, 18 degrees to 20 degrees. The 2010s, 20 degrees to 23 degrees. And the 2020s, 23 degrees to 25 degrees. This is just a basic outline of it, and you can look more specifically to see what degree and minute in your chart. Due to its highly elliptical orbit, Eris spends different amounts of time in different signs. The past century has been roughly 2 to 3 degrees per decade. You can see how slow Eris moves. Eris is so slow moving, her changes in the world and society don't happen as often, and when they do, they are felt for a long time. Eris has the biggest impact in society when other planets make aspects to her. The archetypes of the transit planets in aspect to Eris will give clues as to where and how the disruption and strife might occur. Pluto has been in a square with Eris for a few years, building up tension. But when multiple planets and asteroids moved to join Pluto in Capricorn, square to Eris, this past January 2020, it compounded the energy and blew it up. Mars will move to conjunct Eris in August, while squaring the Capricorn planet. This will be a hard month. Things will get heated, and to say the least. The people are sick and tired of the abuse of power by the, quote, gods, the government, police, people in power. Eris empowers the people. Things might get unruly, to say the least. Protests, riots, another viral outbreak is a concern, potentially not a naturally occurring one either. While Mars was in Capricorn this past March, conjunct all the Cap planets and square to Eris, the people were generally good and followed the rules. But as Mars moves in Aries this summer and joins Eris to square Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter and Pallas, things have the potential to blow up. The theme of the coming August and into fall will be centered around the archetypes here. Eris and Mars, square to Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, and Pallas. The combo of Mars and Eris together on the battlefield. And I quote, Eris, the goddess who calls forth war and discord. According to the Iliad, she wanders about at first, small and insignificant, but soon she raises her head up to the heaven. She is the friend and sister of Ares, Mars, and with him she delights in the tumult of war, increasing the moaning of men. She is insatiable for her desire for bloodshed, and after all the other gods have withdrawn from the battlefield, she remains, rejoicing in the havoc. So with those two, square to Pallas, the third ruler of warfare, we must be careful to temper anger and frustration as best as possible, because war on any level is possible. And warfare can be many things, not just conventional military warfare. Just keep that in mind. In the natal chart, look to the planets transiting your Eris and watch for disruptions and strife in the areas of life related to that planet. In the same way, the transiting planets of Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter all move to aspect Eris currently. The same thing applies to one's chart. The transit of Eris to one's natal chart is more significant if it moves across an angle or makes an exact aspect to the arc minute due to how slow it moves. An interesting note I'd like to add is that the early 90s Uranus conjunct Neptune generation had that planetary configuration square to Eris. Personally, I have Eris in my chart strongly, and in learning about her, it has helped me understand this part of myself and my chart, and I can better channel the energy around it. I used to try to attribute parts of myself to other planets and things in my chart, but it never fit quite right. In learning about Eris, it filled in a lot. I can channel Eris's energy in a more healthy way because it won't be coming from my subconscious. That is another reason why I think it is important to study and use Eris more in astrology. As we understand an archetype more, it holds less power over us. We can actively direct its forces in our psyche instead of being at their mercy. Like all the trans-Neptunian objects, Eris is a powerful force in the subconscious, Pluto in the same way. It is important now with all the TNOs to bring them into better understanding, i.e. those parts of our psyche into better understanding. Ultimately, Eris in the highest expression is a relentless desire and strength and ability to fight and disrupt and do what is needed to challenge and change the status quo. And Eris at the worst expression just wants to watch the world burn.